Snow fell softly across downtown Chicago as volunteers rushed around the crowded Christmas gift drive, carrying boxes of toys, winter coats, and bags filled with canned food. Children laughed near the giant decorated tree while parents waited patiently in long lines wrapped around the community center. But in the farthest corner of the room, away from the music and holiday cheer, sat a little black girl completely alone. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her thin coat was too small for her. Her sneakers were soaked from the snow outside, and she held a tiny paper ticket tightly in both hands, like it was the only thing she owned in the world. Most people walked past her without noticing. Except one man did. Ethan Callaway, billionaire tech founder and one of the richest men in America, had only stopped by the event for a quick public appearance. Cameras followed him everywhere as reporters waited near the entrance, hoping for photos of the famous businessman donating toys for Christmas. But Ethan wasn't paying attention to any of them anymore. His eyes stayed fixed on the little girl sitting alone. Something about her silence bothered him. While everyone else smiled, talked, and celebrated, she looked terrified. He slowly walked toward her. "Hey there," he said gently, kneeling beside her chair. "You okay?" The little girl looked up immediately, startled. Her dark brown eyes were wide with caution, as if she had already learned not to trust strangers too easily. For a moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, almost too softly to hear, she replied, "I'm waiting for my mum." Ethan glanced around the crowded hall. "Is she inside?" The girl shook her head. "She dropped me off this morning before work. She said she'd come back after her second job." Ethan checked his watch. "It was already past 8 p.m. You've been here all day?" She nodded again. One of the volunteers walked over carrying donation forms. "Oh, her?" the woman whispered to Ethan. "She came around noon. Barely spoke the entire day. We tried calling her mother, but the number stopped working." The billionaire looked back at the child. "What's your name?" "Naomi." "That's a beautiful name." For the first time, the girl smiled just a little. Ethan noticed she hadn't collected any gifts yet. Her ticket was still untouched. "Didn't you pick something out?" he asked. Naomi looked toward the nearly empty toy tables. There were kids who wanted them more. The answer hit him harder than he expected. An 8-year-old girl who had nothing was still thinking about other people first. Ethan swallowed quietly. "What did you want for Christmas?" he asked. Naomi hesitated. "A blanket." He blinked. "Just a blanket. Our apartment gets cold at night," she admitted. "Mama says the heater works sometimes, but not always." Around them, the loud Christmas music suddenly felt distant. Ethan had spent nearly $50,000 on a holiday party the previous weekend. He owned 3 vacation homes he barely visited. Yet this little girl's biggest Christmas wish was a warm blanket. Before he could respond, Naomi carefully reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made this," she said shyly. It was a hand-drawn Christmas card colored with cheap crayons. On the front was a badly drawn snowman and the words, "Thank you for helping people." Inside, dozens of tiny handwritten names filled the page. "Who are these?" Ethan asked. "The volunteers," Naomi explained. "And the families here. Mama says people helping each other matters more than presents." Ethan stared at the e-card in silence. Then something unexpected happened. Naomi pointed toward the refreshment table. "That man hasn't eaten." An elderly homeless man stood near the back wall, pretending not to look at the food trays. Before Ethan could stop her, Naomi grabbed the small sandwich she'd been saving all day and walked over to him. "You can have mine," she told the man. The old man looked stunned. "But sweetheart, what about you?" "I'm okay," she replied with a smile that looked far older than her age. Ethan felt his throat tighten. For years, newspapers had called him brilliant, visionary, ruthless. But standing there in that crowded Christmas drive, watching a hungry little girl give away the only food she had, Ethan suddenly realized something painful. He had spent most of his life building companies, not connections, making money, not memories. The volunteers continued packing up for the night as snow piled higher outside. Still no sign of Naomi's mother. Finally, Ethan made a decision. He called his driver. Then he called someone else, his private security team. Within an hour, they located Naomi's mother working late cleaning office buildings across the city. Her phone had been discarded. Connected 2 weeks earlier after she fell behind on bills. When Naomi's exhausted mother finally rushed through the community center doors, tears streamed down her face. "I'm so sorry," she cried, hugging Naomi tightly. The buses stopped running and I couldn't leave work early. Naomi simply hugged her back. It's okay, Mama. Ethan stood nearby quietly watching them. Then Naomi's mother noticed who he was and immediately looked embarrassed. I didn't want charity, she said softly. I just wanted my daughter to have one good Christmas. Ethan looked around the nearly empty room. You already gave her that, he replied. The woman frowned slightly. I did? You raised someone who thinks about feeding strangers before herself. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed Naomi the crayon Christmas card she had accidentally left behind. No, he said gently. Actually, I think you gave something to me. Naomi looked confused. Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. Real one, not the kind cameras captured. That night, instead of returning to his penthouse, Ethan cancelled every meeting on his schedule and stayed at the shelter, helping volunteers die. Tribute leftover gifts until nearly midnight, and before Christmas morning arrived, an anonymous donation paid the heating bills for over 200 struggling families across the city. Nobody knew where the money came from, except a little girl named Naomi, who finally got her Christmas blanket. Christmas morning arrived covered in fresh snow, but Ethan Calloway barely noticed the view outside his penthouse windows. For the first time in years, he hadn't spent the holiday on a private jet or inside some luxury resort surrounded by people pretending to care about him. Instead, he sat alone at his kitchen counter, staring at a child's crayon Christmas card. Naomi's card. The uneven handwriting and tiny snowman drawing should have looked childish, but to Ethan, it felt more valuable than every expensive painting hanging in his apartment. His assistant entered carefully. Sir, the investors from London are waiting for the conference call. Ethan didn't even look up. Cancel it. The assistant froze. Cancel. All of it. All of it. Within an hour, headlines began spreading online. Billionaire CEO suddenly cancels Christmas business summit. Nobody knew the real reason, but Ethan could. Don't stop thinking about Naomi and her mother. The freezing apartment, the disconnected phone, the exhausted woman working 2 jobs just to survive, and most of all, the little girl who gave away her sandwich while asking for nothing except a blanket. By afternoon, Ethan found himself driving through the poorer side of Chicago alone. No cameras, no security team, no reporters. He carried several shopping bags filled with groceries, winter clothes, and wrapped Christmas presents. But when he finally reached Naomi's apartment building, his heart sank. The place looked worse than he imagined. Broken windows covered with cardboard, hallway lights flickering, water stains crawling across the ceiling. Even the elevator was broken. As Ethan climbed the stairs carrying the bags himself, he heard loud arguing from another apartment. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried while cold winds slipped through cracked walls. This was America too, not the version shown in magazines, the real version. He finally reached apartment 4B and knocked gently. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened. Naomi's mother stood there frozen in shock. Mr. Calloway? Ethan suddenly felt awkward. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I just wanted to check on you both. Behind her, Naomi's face lit up instantly. You came back. Before Ethan could react, she threw her arms around him. No hesitation, no fear, just pure happiness. And strangely, that simple hug affected him more than billion-dollar business deals ever had. Inside the apartment, the heat barely worked. The furniture was old and worn down, but everything was spotless. Naomi's mother clearly took pride in keeping what little they had clean. You didn't have to bring anything, she said quietly as Ethan placed groceries on the counter. It's just food, he replied, but Naomi gasped when she noticed the wrapped presents. For me? You can open them later, Ethan said with a smile. The little girl carefully touched the ribbon without tearing it immediately, almost like she wanted the moment to last longer. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed something else. On the kitchen table sat stacks of unpaid bills beside medical papers. His expression changed slightly. Naomi's mother quickly tried covering them. It's nothing. But Ethan had already seen enough. Hospital debt, emergency surgery, late rent notices. How long has this been going on? He asked softly. The woman hesitated before finally answering. Since Naomi's father died. The room became quiet. He passed away 2 years ago during a construction accident, she continued. After that, everything fell apart. Naomi looked down silently, already familiar with this conversation. Ethan felt guilt twist inside him. His own company owned construction projects across multiple states. Thousands of workers risked their lives every day building fortunes for people like him. Yet families like Naomi's were often forgotten the second tragedy struck. What was his name? Ethan asked. Marcus. Naomi smiled faintly. Mama says he used to sing badly while cooking pancakes. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds dangerous. It was, Naomi giggled. He burned everything. For a few moments, the apartment no longer felt sad. It felt warm, alive. And Ethan realized something terrifying. He couldn't remember the last time he laughed like this inside his own home. Later that evening, Naomi opened her presents carefully one by one. A thick pink blanket, new boots, books, art supplies. But when she reached the final small box, she looked confused. Inside was a simple silver snowflake necklace. My mom used to wear one like this, Ethan admitted quietly. She gave it away years ago to help another family during Christmas. Naomi held it gently. It's beautiful. Ethan stared out the frosted window. My mother believed money only mattered if it protected people. What do you believe? Naomi asked innocently. The question hit harder than she intended, because Ethan honestly didn't know anymore. Before he could answer, loud knocking suddenly echoed through the apartment. Everyone froze. Naomi's mother looked nervous immediately. When she opened the door, two angry men stood outside. One held paperwork. You've ignored 3 eviction notices, he snapped. You have until New Year's Eve to leave. Naomi's face went pale. But Mama, her mother forced a smile. It's okay, baby. But Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. The landlord finally noticed Ethan standing behind them and instantly changed expression. Wait, you're Ethan Calloway. Ethan stepped forward calmly. How much does she owe? The man named the amount quickly. To Ethan, it was less than the cost of one dinner meeting, but for Naomi's mother, it might as well have been $1 million. He pulled out his phone. Paid, he said. The landlord blinked. Just like that? No, Ethan replied coldly. Not just like that. You threatened a family on Christmas. The men left without another word. As silence returned, Naomi's mother suddenly burst into tears. You didn't have to save us. Ethan looked toward Naomi sitting quietly under her new blanket. Yes, he said softly. I think I did. The days after Christmas should have felt normal again. But nothing in Ethan Calloway's life felt normal anymore. Every morning, his executives flooded his phone with urgent emails about investors, mergers, and company profits. Yet instead of answering them immediately, Ethan found himself thinking about a tiny apartment in South Chicago, where a little girl laughed over burnt pancakes and treated a pink blanket like treasure. It confused him. For years, Ethan had believed success meant staying emotionally untouchable. The richer he became, the more distant he grew from everyone around him. But somehow Naomi had broken through walls nobody else could even reach. 3 days after Christmas, Ethan returned to the apartment building carrying breakfast from a nearby diner. When Naomi opened the door, her eyes widened. You came back again? I brought pancakes, Ethan announced proudly. Naomi grinned. Did you burn them? Only slightly. From the kitchen, her mother laughed for the first time since Ethan had met her. The sound surprised even her. For the next hour, the 3 of them sat around the tiny table eating together while snow drifted quietly outside the windows. Naomi talked non-stop about school, art, and her dream of becoming an architect someday. I want to build houses for families who lose theirs, she explained seriously. Ethan paused mid-bite. Why architects? Because buildings are supposed to protect people. The sentence hit him harder than she realized, especially considering what happened to her father. As Naomi excitedly showed Ethan her drawings, his phone suddenly buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Finally, he checked it. His board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting. Apparently, shareholders were furious. Ethan had recently redirected millions of dollars from luxury corporate projects into emergency housing programs and employee support funds. Investors called it reckless. One message stood out clearly. You are losing focus. Ethan stared at the words silently. Maybe they were right. Or maybe for the first time in his life, he was finally seeing clearly. That afternoon, Ethan arrived at headquarters where tension filled the entire building. Executives whispered nervously as he walked through the halls. Inside the boardroom, one investor immediately exploded. You're turning $1 billion company into a charity organization. Another slammed documents onto the table. You cancelled profitable contracts to renovate homeless shelters. Ethan stayed calm. Yes, this is business, Ethan. No, he replied quietly. This is responsibility. The room erupted with arguments. For over an hour they attacked every decision he'd made since Christmas, but Ethan barely reacted, because while they talked about profits and stock prices, all he could picture was Naomi sitting alone at that gift drive, clutching a paper ticket no child should ever have to hold by themselves. Finally, one older board member leaned forward. What changed you? The room became silent. Ethan thought carefully before answering. A little girl asked me what I believed in. Nobody spoke after that. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi's mother received terrible news at work. The office cleaning company she worked for was downsizing. Her hours were cut immediately, which meant less money, less food, and possibly losing the apartment again within months. She hid the news from Naomi that evening, pretending everything was fine. But children notice more than adults think. Later that night, Naomi quietly asked, "Are we poor again?" Her mother's face broke instantly. "Baby, we've always been poor." Naomi looked down at her coloring book. Then why do rich people get to decide if families stay safe? The question lingered painfully in the room. The next morning, Ethan surprised them again, but this time he wasn't alone. Several workers entered carrying boxes, new heaters, fresh furniture, groceries, winter clothes. Naomi stared in shock. "What's happening?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Your apartment deserves better." Her mother immediately shook her head. "This is too much?" "No," Ethan replied gently. "Too much is a child sleeping in the cold while billionaires waste money on things they don't need." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Naomi suddenly hugged her mother tightly. "We're gonna be okay," she whispered. Her mother closed her eyes, tracing Ying not to cry. But the biggest surprise came later that afternoon. Ethan took Naomi and her mother downtown to a massive office building covered in glass windows. Naomi tilted her head upward. "Whoa!" "This," Ethan said, "is where I work." Inside, employees stared in disbelief as the billionaire CEO personally walked through the building holding Naomi's backpack while she pointed excitedly at everything around her. One worker whispered, "Who's the little girl?" Another replied quietly, "I don't know, but he's smiling." They reached the top floor where the city skyline stretched endlessly beyond giant windows. Naomi pressed her hands against the glass. "It looks like the whole world." Ethan watched her silently. Then he handed her a small leather notebook. "What's this?" she asked. "For your building ideas." Naomi opened it carefully. The first page already had words written inside. "Design places that make people feel safe." Naomi looked up at him with shining eyes. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something inside himself healing. But downstairs in the lobby, a reporter secretly snapped photos through the glass doors. By evening, social media exploded with headlines. By Millionaire CEO seen secretly spending time with unknown child. The internet immediately began speculating. Some accused Ethan of using the girl for publicity. Others questioned Naomi's mother. And before the night ended, reporters had already started searching for them. By sunrise, Naomi's apartment building was surrounded by reporters. Camera flashes lit up the snowy streets while news vans blocked the sidewalks. Neighbors peeked through curtains as journalists shouted questions toward anyone entering or leaving the building. Is the billionaire adopting the child? Did the mother ask him for money? Is this a publicity stunt? Inside apartment 4B, Naomi sat quietly near the window clutching her notebook. Her mother looked terrified. "I knew this would happen," she whispered. "People like us don't get help without strings attached." Ethan arrived 30 minutes later wearing a black coat and baseball cap, but reporters recognized him instantly. Questions exploded from every direction. "Mr. Calloway, are the rumors true? Are you financially supporting the family? Why are you involved with them?" Ethan ignored every camera and walked straight into the building. The moment he entered the apartment, Naomi ran toward him. "They're scary," she admitted softly. Ethan knelt beside her. "You don't have to answer anyone. But they keep saying bad things about Mama online." That made Ethan's expression darken immediately. Her mother looked exhausted. "Someone posted our address." Ethan froze. "What?" "My boss called this morning," she continued shakily. "They said reporters were bothering customers outside the office building. I got suspended until things calmed down." Naomi lowered her head instantly. "It's my fault." "No," Ethan said firmly. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, the room became still. "None of this is your fault." For the first time since meeting him, Naomi looked genuinely afraid, not of him, but of becoming a problem. Ethan recognized that look immediately. He had worn it himself as a child after his father abandoned their family, the feeling that your existence makes life harder for others. And suddenly he understood Naomi far more deeply than before. Without another word, Ethan stood up and made a phone call. Within 2 hours, private security officers arrived outside the building to keep reporter S away. Another team scrubbed Naomi's leaked address from websites and social media pages. But the damage had already spread online. Millions of people were discussing them. Some defended Ethan's kindness. Others accused Naomi's mother of manipulating him for money. One television host even mocked the situation live on air. A billionaire playing hero for Christmas? Please, give it a month. Ethan watched the clip from his office later that afternoon. Normally criticism never bothered him, but this time felt different because now innocent people were getting hurt too. His assistant entered carefully. There's more bad news. Ethan rubbed his temples. What now? The board wants you removed as CEO. Silence filled the room. They believe your recent decisions are damaging the company's image. Ethan stared out the window at the city below. For years he sacrificed everything for that company. Birthdays, relationships, sleep, peace. And now the same people who praised him for making billions wanted him gone because he helped one struggling family. Strangely, instead of anger, he felt tired. That evening, Ethan returned to Naomi's apartment carrying pizza and a hot chocolate, pretending everything was normal. Naomi opened the door slowly. "You okay?" he asked. She shrugged, then quietly said, "Kids at school found me online." Ethan's chest tightened. "What happened?" They asked if we were poor because Mama was lazy. The room fell silent. Naomi tried acting strong, but Ethan noticed her eyes were red from crying. Her mother looked furious and heartbroken at the same time. "I'm pulling her out of school," she said immediately. "No," Naomi whispered quickly. "I like school." Ethan sat beside her carefully. "When I was your age," he said softly, "kids used to make fun of my clothes." Naomi looked surprised. "You were rich, though." He shook his head. "Not back then." For the first time, Ethan told them the truth about his childhood, how his mother worked double shifts at diners, how they lived in tiny apartments with leaking ceilings, how he once got mocked for wearing the same shoes every day for nearly a year. "I became rich later," he explained quietly. "But money doesn't erase loneliness." Naomi listened carefully. "Were you scared too?" "All the time." The honesty in his voice changed something between them. Suddenly, Ethan no longer felt like an untouchable billionaire, just a human being who remembered what struggle felt like. Naomi slowly leaned against his shoulder while holding her hot chocolate, and for once, she looked safe. But the peaceful moment didn't last. A loud knock suddenly rattled the apartment door. Everyone froze. A mother cautiously opened it. A man in an expensive suit stood outside holding legal papers. "I'm here representing Callaway Industries shareholders." Ethan immediately stood. "What is this?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The board officially requests your resignation effective immediately." Naomi's eyes widened. "You're getting fired," the lawyer continued coldly. "Your association with this family has created unacceptable public controversy." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Then something unexpected happened. Naomi stepped forward, small, shaking slightly, but brave. "He didn't do anything bad," she said. The lawyer barely looked at her. "This is business, sweetheart." Naomi frowned. "My dad used to say people hide behind big words when they don't want to feel guilty." The apartment became completely silent. Even Ethan looked stunned. The lawyer awkwardly cleared his throat before leaving the papers behind and walking away. After the door closed, Naomi looked worried. "Did I make it worse?" Ethan slowly picked up the resignation papers. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed. Not bitterly, not angrily, just honestly. Because for the first time in years, losing power didn't scare him anymore. He looked down at Naomi and smiled. "You may have just saved me." The next morning, Ethan Callaway walked into the headquarters of Callaway Industries for what everyone assumed would be his final day as CEO. Employees lined the hallways whispering nervously as he passed. Some looked sympathetic, others avoided eye contact completely. News channels were already broadcasting live outside the building. Billionaire CEO expected to resign after public scandal. But Ethan felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking into the building thinking about profits or stock prices. He was thinking about people, about Naomi, about her mother, about the thousands of struggling families invisible to executives sitting in glass towers making decisions far away from real life. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere felt icy. Every board member sat waiting with prepared statements and legal documents. The chairman folded his hands together. "Ethan, before this becomes uglier, we advise you to step down quietly." Another executive nodded. "The company cannot survive emotional leadership." Ethan slowly looked around the room. Then he asked a simple question. "How many of you have ever been inside one of the neighborhoods our workers actually live in?" Nobody answered. He continued. "How many of you know what our janitors earn compared to what we spend on executive bonuses?" Still silence. One impatient investor sighed. "This isn't relevant. No," Ethan replied quietly. "It's the first relevant conversation this company has had in years." The room shifted uncomfortably. Ethan placed Naomi's crayon Christmas card on the table. Several board members exchanged confused looks. "This little girl gave away her only meal to a homeless man," Ethan said, "then went home to an apartment without proper heat." One executive rolled his eyes slightly. "With respect, Ethan, isolated emotional stories shouldn't dictate corporate policy." Ethan's voice is harsh. Ned immediately. "That's exactly the problem. You think people are stories instead of human beings." The tension became unbearable. Finally, the chairman slid the resignation papers forward. "Sign them." Ethan stared at the documents for several seconds, then calmly pushed them back. "No." The room erupted instantly. "You can't be serious. Shareholders will revolt. You're destroying your legacy." But Ethan remained completely still. "My legacy was already broken," he said softly. "I just didn't realize it until now." At that exact moment, something unexpected happened downstairs. Hundreds of company employees began gathering outside the building entrance. Janitors, security guards, receptionists, delivery workers, maintenance staff, even junior office employees. Someone had posted Ethan's recent housing initiatives online, including anonymous donations that saved families from eviction during Christmas, and workers were responding. One elderly janitor spoke to reporters through tears. "Mr. Calloway paid for my wife's surgery last week. Nobody even told us it was him." A single mother from accounting added. "He created emergency childcare funding for EMP employees after hearing my situation." Soon the crowd outside grew larger. People started chanting Ethan's name. Inside the boardroom, executives watched the live broadcast in stunned silence. "What is this?" one investor whispered. But Ethan looked equally shocked, because he never told anyone about most of those donations. Naomi's mother had been right. Real kindness spreads quietly. Meanwhile, across town, Naomi sat in school trying to ignore classmates whispering about her again. But this time something was different. A girl from another table suddenly walked over carrying a juice box. "My mom said the billionaire helped your family." Naomi nodded carefully. The girl smiled shyly. "That was nice." Then another student spoke up. "And my dad said rich people never help anyone unless they care for real." One by one, the tension around Naomi slowly disappeared. Children moved on faster than adults. They cared less about headlines and more about how someone actually treated people. Later that afternoon, Ethan finally left the boardroom exhausted. The board hadn't removed him yet, but the company was now deeply divided. As he stepped outside, cameras immediately surrounded him. "Mr. Calloway, are you resigning? Is the controversy over? What's your response to the backlash?" Ethan paused for a moment. Then he looked directly into the cameras. "When I met Naomi, she was sitting alone at a Christmas gift drive, asking for nothing except a blanket," he said calmly. The crowd became silent. "She reminded me that dignity should never depend on wealth." Reporters stopped shouting. Ethan continued, "If helping struggling families threatens my position as CEO, then maybe the position was never worth protecting." Within minutes, the speech spread everywhere online. Millions watched it. Some mocked him, but far more people connected deeply with his words. Donations to shelters across Chicago suddenly surged overnight. Volunteers signed up in record numbers. And dozens of companies quietly announced new employee assistance programs after public pressure exploded online. Even Ethan hadn't expected that. One little act of kindness had started changing far more lives than he realized. That evening, Ethan visited Naomi again. This time the apartment felt warmer, not just physically, emotionally. Naomi ran toward him excitedly, holding a drawing. "I made something," Ethan smiled. "Let me see." It was a picture of 3 people standing under falling snow beside a giant Christmas tree. One figure was clearly Naomi, the second was her mother, and the third was Ethan. Above them she had written carefully, "Nobody should sit alone." Ethan stared at the drawing quietly for several seconds. Then Naomi asked the question he wasn't prepared for. "Are you gonna disappear now?" The innocence in her voice nearly broke him, because deep down, she had already experienced too many people leaving. Her father, neighbors, friends, promises. Ethan slowly knelt beside her. "No," he said honestly. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in years, Ethan Calloway woke up without checking the stock market. Instead, he stood inside Naomi's apartment kitchen flipping pancakes while she laughed at how badly he kept burning them. "You missed one again," Naomi teased. "I'm experimenting," Ethan argued proudly. "With fire?" Her mother shook her head, smiling into her coffee. The apartment still wasn't fancy. The walls were old, the windows rattled during heavy wind, and the furniture didn't match. But However, it felt more like home than Ethan's penthouse ever had. And that terrified him a little, because he was starting to care too much. Later that afternoon, Ethan brought Naomi and her mother to a new building downtown. The massive brick structure looked abandoned from the outside, surrounded by construction crews and workers carrying supplies. Naomi tilted her head curiously. "What is this place?" Ethan handed her a small yellow safety helmet, a second chance. Inside, workers were transforming the old building into something completely different. Large family apartments, free childcare rooms, a food pantry, study spaces for children, emergency housing offices. Naomi's eyes widened with every step. "You're building all this?" Ethan nodded. "For families who need somewhere safe to restart." Her mother looked stunned. "This must cost millions." "It does. Why?" Ethan paused, then looked directly at Naomi. "Because one little girl reminded me what people are supposed to do for each other." Naomi smiled shyly. But nearby, several construction workers quietly watched Ethan interacting with the family. One older worker approached nervously. "Mr. Calloway." "Why?" Ethan turned. The man hesitated before speaking again. "My brother worked one of your sites years ago." Ethan immediately noticed the sadness in his eyes. "He died during an accident." The room suddenly became still. Naomi's mother lowered her gaze. The worker continued quietly. "Nobody from management ever spoke to our family afterward." Ethan felt guilt crash through him instantly. For years, he signed paperwork from air-conditioned offices while workers risked their lives daily, and families paid the price. "I'm sorry," Ethan said honestly. The worker studied him carefully, then surprised everyone by extending his hand. "You're different now." Ethan shook it silently, but those words stayed with him the entire day. That evening, news about Ethan's housing project exploded online after drone footage leaked from the construction site. People were shocked. The billionaire wasn't building another luxury tower. He was converting his own commercial property into affordable housing and emergency shelters. Social media reactions divided instantly. Some called him inspirational. Others accused him of trying to repair his reputation. But then something unexpected happened. Major celebrities began donating. Athletes volunteered funding. Restaurants offered free meals. Even rival companies quietly joined the project after public support grew impossible to ignore. And at the center of it all was a little black girl nobody knew 2 weeks earlier. Meanwhile, Naomi struggled with attention at school. Students constantly stared now. Teachers treated her differently. One girl even asked if Naomi was secretly rich. Naomi hated it. During lunch break, she sat alone again under the staircase holding her notebook tightly. For a moment, it felt exactly like the Christmas gift drive all over again, until someone sat beside her. It was her teacher, Mrs. Alvarez. "You okay?" Naomi shrugged. "They only notice me because of Ethan." Mrs. Alvarez smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. They notice you because kindness stands out in a loud world." Naomi looked down quietly. "My dad used to say people forget poor people exist." The teacher's eyes watered slightly. "Your father sounds wise." Naomi nodded. "He said invisible people still matter." That sentence stayed with Mrs. Alvarez long after lunch ended. Later that night, Ethan attended. A massive corporate gala he normally would have dominated effortlessly. But this time felt different. Executives whispered about him behind champagne glasses. Wealthy investors avoided eye contact. Some smiled fake smiles while waiting for him to fail publicly. Then, during the charity auction, the host proudly announced donations for children's hospitals and educational programs. The crowd applauded politely, but Ethan suddenly stood up. "I'd like to make a different contribution." The room became silent. Every camera immediately pointed toward him. Ethan walked slowly onto the stage. Then he pulled something unexpected from his pocket. Naomi's Christmas card, the same wrinkled crayon card she made at the gift drive. People exchanged confused looks. Ethan faced the audience calmly. 2 weeks ago, I met a little girl whose Christmas wish was a blanket because her apartment had no heat. The ballroom became uncomfortably quiet. She gave away her only sandwich to someone hungrier than her. Nobody moved. For years I believed success meant becoming powerful enough to never struggle again, Ethan continued. But I was wrong. Some guests lowered their eyes. "Eth." He held up the card gently. "The most generous person I met this year had almost nothing." By the end of the speech, many people in the room were visibly emotional, and before the auction even resumed, millions of dollars in new donations flooded into family shelters across Chicago. But while applause filled the ballroom, Ethan noticed something painful. Most wealthy people only cared once cameras were watching. Naomi had cared when nobody was looking. That was the difference. When Ethan returned to the apartment later that night, he found Naomi asleep on the couch under her pink blanket, her notebook resting against her chest. Curious, he carefully opened it. Inside were dozens of drawings, buildings, parks, apartments, playgrounds. Every page showed homes filled with smiling families. But one drawing made Ethan stop breathing for a second. It showed a giant building with words written across the front. "No child sleeps alone." At the bottom corner, Naomi had signed both their names together. And for the first time in years, Ethan Calloway cried. Winter slowly faded across Chicago, but people still talked about the billionaire and the little girl from the Chris T-Mass gift drive. What started as one quiet moment in a crowded community center had turned into something nobody expected. Families facing eviction were receiving help. Emergency shelters were expanding. Companies across the country were launching employee relief programs after public pressure continued growing. But Ethan Calloway barely paid attention to the headlines anymore, because the most important changes were happening far away from cameras. Like Saturday mornings in Naomi's apartment learning how to make pancakes without burning them, or helping her with math homework while she corrected his terrible drawings, or watching her mother slowly smile again after years of surviving instead of living. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt connected to something real. One snowy evening in February, Ethan invited Naomi and her mother to visit the nearly completed housing center downtown. The building looked completely transformed now. Warm lights glowed through giant windows. Children's murals covered the hallways, and volunteers carried furniture into finished apartments. Above the entrance hung a brand new sign, the Marcus Center. Naomi froze. "That's my dad's name." Ethan nodded quietly. He spent his life building things for other people. "I thought people should remember that." Naomi's mother covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "You did all this for him, for families like yours," Ethan corrected gently. Inside the lobby, dozens of families explored their new apartments while children laughed and ran through the halls. Some parents cried openly, after months of living in shelters or cars. Naomi looked around in amazement. "They're really gonna live here?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Forever?" "As long as they need." One little boy ran past carrying a toy dinosaur before suddenly stopping in front of Naomi. "Are you the girl from the news?" Naomi looked nervous at first, then the boy grinned. "My mom said you helped build this place." Before Naomi could answer, another child pulled her toward the playroom excitedly. Within minutes, she disappeared into a crowd of laughing kids. Ethan watched her go with a quiet smile. "She gave them hope," he said softly. Her mother stood beside him silently for a moment before asking the question she had avoided for weeks. "Why us?" Ethan looked through the glass windows too, toward the snowy streets outside. "Because when I met Naomi, she still believed people mattered." His voice lowered slightly. "And I think part of me forgot that. Upstairs, Naomi wandered into a quiet study room filled with books, computers, and art supplies. On one wall hung framed drawings created by local children, but in the center stood one large framed picture, all by itself. Naomi slowly walked closer. It was her drawing, the one with 3 people standing under falling snow beside a Christmas tree. Nobody should sit alone. Below it, a small silver plaque read, "Inspired by Naomi Carter, whose kindness changed more lives than she may ever know." Naomi stared at it speechless. Behind her, Ethan spoke gently. "Do you like it?" She turned toward him slowly. "You kept it." I needed the reminder. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Then Naomi asked quietly, "Do billionaires cry?" Ethan laughed softly. "Apparently this one does." Naomi smiled before suddenly hugging him tightly. This time Ethan hugged her back immediately. Not awkwardly at all. Not carefully. Like family. Months later, spring arrived. The Marcus Center officially opened with hundreds of families attending the celebration. News stations covered the event nationally, but Ethan refused private interviews. Instead, he stood quietly in the background while Naomi helped cut the ribbon beside her mother. People applauded loudly, but Ethan barely noticed the crowd, because across the playground he saw something that mattered more. Children laughing freely without fear, parents smiling without exhaustion, families feeling safe. And near the entrance, wrapped carefully in a glass display case, sat one simple pink blanket beside a handwritten card, the same blanket Naomi once wished for during the coldest Christmas of her life. Visitors often stopped to read the message beside it. Sometimes the smallest wish can change the biggest heart. That evening, after everyone left, Ethan and Naomi sat together on the building rooftop watching the city lights flicker below. "You know," Naomi said thoughtfully, "you're not as grumpy anymore." Ethan pretended to look offended. "I was never grumpy. You definitely were." He laughed quietly. The wind carried soft music from the celebration downstairs while snow began falling again unexpectedly. Naomi looked up at the sky, smiling. "Do you think people can really change?" Ethan looked at the glowing building beneath them, at the families inside finally sleeping somewhere warm, at the little girl beside him who had unknowingly rebuilt a broken man's heart. Then he answered honestly. "Yeah," he said, "I think they can."